My best friend brought my ex to my wedding as their plus one. The bouquet in my hands trembled as I watched Jessica walk down the aisle toward me, her arm linked with him. Mark. My cheating ex-fiancé. At my wedding. I blinked hard, certain I was hallucinating from wedding day nerves, but no, there was Jessica in her dusty rose bridesmaid dress, beaming like she'd done nothing wrong, while Mark adjusted his tie with that same smug smile he'd worn when I caught him in bed with his coworker 2 years ago. Sarah, honey, you look pale, my mom whispered from the front row, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. The string quartet continued playing, guests turned to admire my maid of honor's entrance, and I stood frozen at the altar feeling like someone had just punched me in the stomach. Jessica took her place beside me, leaning in to whisper, "You look absolutely stunning, babe," as if she hadn't just brought the man who destroyed my last engagement to witness my new one. Mark settled into a seat 3 rows back, catching my eye and having the audacity to wink. My fiancé David squeezed my hand as he approached the altar, concern flickering across his face. "Everything okay?" he mouthed. I forced a smile and nodded, though everything was decidedly not okay. The ceremony passed in a blur. I mechanically recited vows while my mind raced. How could Jessica do this? She was the one who held me while I sobbed for 3 months after catching Mark cheating. She was the one who helped me return the engagement ring and cancel the venue. She sat through countless bottles of wine listening to me process the betrayal, calling Mark every name in the book. "You may kiss the bride," Pastor Williams announced, and David's lips met mine to thunderous applause. But even our first kiss as husband and wife felt tainted by the sight of Mark clapping enthusiastically in row 3. During photos, Jessica acted completely normal, adjusting my veil and making jokes with the other bridesmaids. It wasn't until cocktail hour that she finally approached me, Mark trailing behind her like a lost puppy. "Sarah. Congratulations," she gushed, pulling me into a hug that felt like a performance. "I hope you don't mind that I brought Mark as my plus one. We've been talking lately, just as friends, obviously, and when Jake canceled last minute for that work conference, Mark offered to come with me. I didn't think it would be a big deal since you're clearly so happy with David now." I stared at her, speechless. Just as friends? Not a big deal? This was the woman who knew every detail of my trauma from that relationship. She knew I still had nightmares about finding Mark with Rebecca. She knew I'd been in therapy for 6 months afterward. "It's fine," I managed, my voice tight. Mark stepped forward then, extending his hand. "Congratulations, Sarah. You look beautiful. David's a lucky guy." His tone was warm, familiar, like we were old friends catching up instead of whatever this was. "Thank you," I replied coolly, barely touching his outstretched hand. As they walked away to grab drinks, I watched Jessica throw her head back laughing at something Mark said, her hand briefly touching his arm. My chest burned with a mixture of hurt and rage I hadn't felt since the day I discovered Mark's affair. But as I stood there in my $3,000 wedding dress, watching my oldest friend cozy up to my cheating ex at my own reception, something else bubbled up inside me. Something that felt almost like opportunity. Because Jessica had no idea what I knew about her own dirty little secrets. The reception was in full swing, but I felt like I was watching it all through glass. David had been pulled away by his college buddies for what looked like a 100th congratulatory toast, leaving me standing alone by our sweetheart table, nursing a glass of champagne that had long gone flat. I kept stealing glances at Jessica and Mark across the room. They'd claimed a high-top table near the bar and were deep in conversation, her fingers wrapped around a cosmopolitan while he gestured animatedly with his whiskey. Every few minutes, she'd lean in closer to hear him over the music, and that familiar tinkling laugh would carry across the dance floor. "Sarah." My college roommate Emma appeared at my elbow, slightly breathless from dancing. "This is incredible. The flowers, the venue, everything is perfect. You must be over the moon." "It's been eventful," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Emma followed my gaze to Jessica and Mark's table. Her smile faltered. "Wait, isn't that my cheating ex-fiancé?" "Yes. Jessica's plus one." Emma's mouth dropped open. "You're kidding. Jessica brought Mark?" "The Mark who?" "The very same." I took a long sip of champagne, letting the bubbles burn my throat. "Apparently they're just friends now." "That's..." Emma searched for words. "That's incredibly fucked up, Sarah. Even for Jessica." I raised an eyebrow. "Even for Jessica? What's that supposed to mean?" Emma glanced around nervously. "I mean, you know how she can be sometimes. Remember junior year when she accidentally told Brad Morrison that you had a crush on him right before he asked Stephanie Chen to formal?" Actually, I'd forgotten about that. But now that Emma mentioned it, other memories started surfacing. Like how Jessica always seemed to have inside information about my relationships that she'd casually drop at the worst possible moments. Or how she'd make subtle comments about my choices, my career, my boyfriends, even my wedding dress, that left me feeling uncertain and insecure. "She's always been a little competitive," I said slowly. "A little?" Emma snorted. "Sarah, she literally tried to sleep with your boyfriend sophomore year. You just never found out because Jake felt too guilty and transferred schools instead of following through." The champagne glass nearly slipped from my fingers. "What? Oh shit." Emma's face went pale. I assumed you knew. It was years ago, and nothing actually happened." "Emma." My voice was deadly quiet. "Tell me exactly what you mean." She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "It was during Greek week sophomore year. You were sick with that awful flu, remember? Jessica went to the Sigma Chi party anyway and spent the whole night trying to get Jake alone. She was wasted and kept telling people that you two were practically broken up anyway and that she was just looking out for him. Jake told his roommate about it, who told his girlfriend, who told me. Jake was so freaked out he requested a transfer to USC the next week." My mind reeled. Jake had transferred suddenly spring semester, claiming he needed to be closer to his sick grandmother. I'd been heartbroken, convinced it was something I'd done wrong. Jessica had been so supportive during the breakup, bringing me ice cream and tissues, listening to me analyze every conversation Jake and I had ever had. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. "I wanted to. But Jake made everyone promise not to say anything because he didn't want to ruin your friendship with Jessica. He said it would just hurt you for no reason since he shot her down anyway." Across the room, Jessica threw her head back laughing again, her hand now resting on Mark's forearm. The gesture looked comfortable, practiced. Like they'd done this before. How long had they been just friends? And more importantly, what else had Jessica been hiding from me all these years? The revelation about Jake hit me like a physical blow. I excused myself from Emma and walked toward the bathroom on unsteady legs, my mind racing through years of friendship with Jessica, re-examining every memory through this new, ugly lens. But I never made it to the bathroom. As I passed the coat check area near the venue's back hallway, I heard familiar voices coming from around the corner. Jessica's distinctive laugh, followed by Mark's deeper chuckle. "Can't believe you actually did it," Mark was saying. "I mean, showing up here with me? That's next level petty, even for you." She had it coming. Jessica's voice was different now, colder, without the sugary sweetness she'd been using all day. Miss Perfect Sarah with her perfect wedding and her perfect husband. Do you know she got the promotion I'd been working toward for 8 months? 8 months of staying late, sucking up to the partners, and they give it to her because she has better client relations. My blood turned to ice. She was talking about my promotion to senior marketing director at Hartwell and Associates, the one I'd gotten 3 months ago. Jessica worked at a different firm across town. I had no idea she'd even applied for a similar position. So you decided to ruin her wedding? Mark sounded amused rather than horrified. I decided to knock her down a peg. She thinks she's so much better than everyone else now. Did you see her face when we walked in? Priceless. Jessica's laugh was sharp, vindictive. Besides, it's not like we're actually ruining anything. We're just adding some drama to her perfect little day. And what's in it for me? Mark asked. Besides the pleasure of watching my ex-fiancé swarm? Well, there's the $500 I'm paying you to be here. Plus, who knows? Maybe this will remind her what she gave up. You always said she was the best you ever had. $500. She was paying him to be here. This wasn't some spontaneous decision or even a cruel impulse. This was a calculated attack on my wedding day. She was, Mark agreed, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. Right up until she caught me with Rebecca. Honestly, I always wondered if she'd take me back eventually. She was so pathetic afterward, calling and crying for weeks. The memory of those desperate late-night phone calls, when I was convinced our relationship could be salvaged, made me nauseous. I blocked most of that time out, but now I remembered Jessica encouraging those calls. Maybe you should try one more time, she'd say. Maybe he'll realize what he lost. I thought she was being supportive. Now I realized she was probably enjoying watching me humiliate myself. Think there's any chance? Mark continued. I mean, she's married now, but you said she's been having problems with David. I never said, Jessica started, then stopped. Actually, you know what? She did mention they'd been fighting about money lately. Something about David's student loans being bigger than he told her. And she's been staying late at work a lot. Probably avoiding going home. That was a complete lie. David and I had discussed his loans thoroughly before we got engaged, and I'd been staying late because of the promotion, the one Jessica apparently resented me for getting. But she was spinning it into some narrative of marital problems, feeding it to my ex-fiancé like gossip. Interesting, Mark mused. Very interesting. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. How long had Jessica been planning this? And what else had she told him about my life, my relationship, my vulnerabilities? The sound of footsteps made me panic. I ducked into the coat check room just as they rounded the corner, heading back toward the reception. Through the crack in the door, I watched them walk past, Jessica's hand tucked into Mark's elbow like they were a real couple. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. But instead of calling David or my mom or anyone else who might talk me out of what I was considering, I scrolled to a folder I'd labeled Jessica, do not send. Inside were 17 screenshots I'd taken 2 months ago. The screenshots glowed accusingly on my phone screen in the dim coat check room. I'd taken them on a girls' night 2 months ago when Jessica had passed out on my couch after too many margaritas, her phone buzzing incessantly with text notifications. Just turn it off, I told her around 1 a.m., but she was completely unconscious, snoring softly with her mouth open. The buzzing was keeping me awake, so I'd grabbed her phone to silence it. We'd always known each other's passcodes, another sign of our supposedly unbreakable trust. That's when I saw the name on the screen, Richard M. Redhart. Richard Morrison. Jessica's married boss. The same Richard Morrison who'd been featured in Connecticut Business Monthly last year for his strong family values and 23-year marriage to his wife Patricia, mother of his 3 teenage daughters. I should have just turned the phone off. I should have minded my own business. But something about the heart emoji made me pause, and then I was reading messages that made my stomach turn. Asterisk Richard M. Redhart, can't stop thinking about this afternoon. Patricia's at her sister's until Sunday, asterisk. Jessica, I'm still sore from Tuesday face blowing a kiss worth every minute though. Asterisk Richard M. Redhart, the Marriott downtown has a penthouse suite. Say yes, asterisk. Asterisk Jessica, book it. I'll bring that thing you like, asterisk. I'd scrolled up, horrified but unable to stop myself. The affair had been going on for 7 months. 7 months of explicit photos, romantic getaways during business conferences, and Jessica complaining to me about how she couldn't find a good man while she was sleeping with someone else's husband. The worst part? She'd been getting promoted because of it. Richard had put her in charge of the Hendricks account, their biggest client, despite her having only 2 years of experience. He'd approved her request for a corner office and a 30% salary increase. Everything she'd accomplished at Morrison and Associates was because she was fucking her married boss. I'd screenshot everything that night, telling myself I was protecting Patricia Morrison, who I'd never met. But really, I think I'd known even then that Jessica wasn't the friend I thought she was. Call it intuition or just having finally seen behind her mask, but something in my gut had screamed evidence. Now, hiding in a coat closet at my own wedding reception, I was grateful for that instinct. My phone buzzed with a text from David, asterisk where are you? About to start the toasts, asterisk. The toasts. Jessica was supposed to give the first one as my maid of honor. I could picture her now, probably rushing back to our table, smoothing her hair and putting on that radiant smile she wore so well. She'd stand up with her champagne glass and talk about our unbreakable bond and how lucky David was to have me, all while knowing she'd just paid my cheating ex-fiancé $500 to sabotage my wedding day. But as I stared at those screenshots, 17 damning pieces of evidence that could destroy Jessica's career, her relationship with Richard, and probably Richard's marriage too, I realized I had a choice to make. I could take the high road. I could grit my teeth, get through the rest of my wedding, and deal with Jessica privately later. Cut her out of my life quietly and move on. Or I could give everyone at this reception something to really talk about. The sound of clinking glasses and my new father-in-law's voice calling for attention drifted down the hallway. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to begin the toasts. First up, we have Sarah's maid of honor and best friend since college, Jessica Chin. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and made my decision. I slipped out of the coat check room and made my way back toward the reception, my mind crystal clear for the first time all evening. Through the archway, I could see Jessica standing at our sweetheart table, champagne flute raised, her smile brilliant under the string lights. Sarah and I have been through everything together, she was saying, her voice carrying that practiced warmth that had fooled me for so many years. College heartbreaks, career struggles, family drama, we've always had each other's backs. The irony was so thick I almost laughed out loud. I positioned myself near the back of the crowd, close enough to hear but far enough away that she wouldn't spot me immediately. I remember when Sarah first told me about David, Jessica continued, and I watched my husband's face light up at the mention of his name. She was so nervous about their first date. She called me 3 times asking what to wear, and then another 2 times from the restaurant bathroom because she was convinced she'd said something stupid. Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. David caught my eye from across the room and grinned, probably remembering how anxious I'd been that night. What he didn't know was that Jessica had been encouraging that anxiety, suggesting I was overthinking things, and that David was probably too good to be true. But watching them together tonight, Jessica raised her glass higher. I know that Sarah has found her person. Someone who will love her unconditionally, someone who will never betray her trust, someone who puts her happiness above everything else. The words felt like acid in my ears. Never betray her trust. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of screenshots, my thumb hovering over the first image. 1 tap, and I could send it to everyone in my contacts. Another tap to post it on Instagram, where most of our wedding guests would see it within hours. But as I looked up at Jessica, still glowing in her bridesmaid dress, still playing the role of devoted best friend, a better idea began to form. So please, everyone, raise your glasses to Sarah and David. May your marriage be everything mine will be someday, built on honesty, loyalty, and genuine love. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, glasses clinking throughout the room. Jessica beamed and sat down, accepting congratulations from the other bridesmaids. My father-in-law moved toward the microphone next, ready to give his prepared speech about welcoming me to the family. But I was already walking forward, my heels clicking purposefully against the hardwood floor. Actually, I said, loud enough to carry over the conversations, before we continue, I'd love to say a few words myself. David looked surprised but pleased. Of course, sweetheart, he said into the microphone. Everyone, my beautiful wife would like to share something. The crowd settled back into attention as I approached the microphone. I could see Jessica in my peripheral vision, looking slightly confused but still smiling. Mark was visible at his table, whiskey in hand, probably expecting some generic thank you speech. I adjusted the microphone and looked out at the 150 faces staring back at me, family, friends, colleagues, David's fraternity brothers, my sorority sisters, people who had traveled across the country to celebrate with us. People who thought they knew Jessica Chen as a loyal, successful marketing executive who'd been my best friend for 7 years. Thank you all for being here tonight, I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. David and I are so grateful to be surrounded by the people we love most. People who have supported us, celebrated with us, and most importantly, people who have always been honest with us. I paused, letting that word hang in the air. In the front row, my mother smiled encouragingly. Jessica raised her champagne glass in a little salute, still completely oblivious to what was coming. I've learned a lot about friendship over the years, I continued, and especially in the last few months, I've learned the importance of surrounding yourself with people who genuinely want the best for you. People whose actions match their words. My phone felt warm in my palm, the screenshots ready and waiting. 150 people hung on my every word, champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips, all of them expecting a heartwarming speech about love and gratitude. They had no idea they were about to get something much more memorable. I gripped the microphone stand, my wedding ring catching the light from the string lights overhead. The crowd was completely silent now, waiting for whatever heartfelt sentiment I was building toward. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, wine bottles suspended mid-pour. You know, some of you might have noticed an unexpected guest here tonight, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. My ex-fiancé Mark is here as Jessica's +1. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. I saw my Aunt Linda lean over to whisper something to my cousin Rebecca. David's expression shifted from confusion to concern, his eyes darting between me and Jessica's table. Now, I know what you're thinking, that's a little awkward, right? I mean, Mark is the same man who cheated on me 2 years ago, destroying our engagement just 3 months before our wedding date. My voice remained conversational, almost casual, like I was discussing the weather. Jessica was so supportive during that time. She held me while I cried, helped me return my dress, even drove me to therapy appointments when I was too depressed to leave the house. Jessica's smile was starting to look strained now. She glanced around nervously, probably wondering where I was going with this public rehashing of ancient history. So imagine my surprise when I overheard an interesting conversation about 20 minutes ago, I continued. Apparently, Jessica didn't just randomly decide to bring Mark tonight. She actually paid him $500 to be here. As a wedding gift to me, I suppose. The murmurs grew louder. Someone dropped a fork, the clatter echoing through the suddenly tense room. Jessica had gone completely pale, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. But that's not the most fascinating part, I said, pulling my phone from where I'd tucked it into my dress. The most fascinating part was hearing Jessica tell Mark that I had it coming because I got a promotion she wanted. A promotion at a completely different company, by the way. One that Jessica earned through some very creative methods. Sarah, Jessica's voice cut through the crowd, shaky but trying to sound authoritative. I think you've had too much champagne. Maybe we should. Oh, I'm just getting started, I said smoothly. See, I've been keeping a secret for Jessica. A big one. Because that's what best friends do, right? We keep each other's secrets. Even the ones about sleeping with married bosses. The reaction was immediate. Gasps echoed through the room, someone's chair scraped loudly against the floor, and I heard David's sharp intake of breath from somewhere behind me. Jessica shot to her feet, her face flushed red. Sarah, stop. Right now. Richard Morrison, I continued, reading from my phone screen. Married 23 years, 3 teenage daughters, and according to these text messages, absolutely terrible at maintaining appropriate workplace boundaries. You went through my phone? Jessica's voice cracked with a mixture of fury and panic. You passed out drunk on my couch, sweetie. Your phone wouldn't stop buzzing at 1 a.m. I was trying to be considerate and turn it off when I stumbled across your very detailed correspondence with your boss. I looked up from my phone, meeting her eyes across the room. 7 months, Jessica. 7 months of hotel rooms and office encounters, and all those promotions you've been bragging about? The corner office, the 30% raise, the Hendricks account? All because you've been fucking a married man with 3 kids. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see phone screens lighting up throughout the crowd as guests frantically started texting, probably alerting friends who weren't here to tune into social media immediately. Mark had the audacity to look entertained, leaning back in his chair with that same smug expression I remembered from our relationship. But Jessica looked like she might vomit, swaying slightly on her feet. Patricia Morrison deserves to know what her husband's been up to, I said, my voice growing stronger. And everyone at Morrison and Associates deserves to know why Jessica's been getting preferential treatment. Please, Jessica whispered, but it was loud enough for the microphone to pick up. Sarah, please don't do this. I smiled, the same bright, fake smile she'd been giving me all evening. Just as friends, right? The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Jessica stood frozen at her table, her champagne glass now forgotten on the white tablecloth, a dark stain spreading where she'd spilled it. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly, and I could see the exact moment she realized I wasn't bluffing. You want to see the messages? I asked sweetly, holding up my phone. I've got screenshots. Lots of them. Richard really has quite the imagination when it comes to describing what he wants to do to you in that penthouse suite. Sarah, that's enough. David's voice cut through the tension as he moved toward the microphone. His face was a mixture of concern and confusion, clearly trying to process what his new wife was doing at their wedding reception. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. Oh, David, there's so much more, I said, gently touching his arm as he reached me. Did you know that Jessica tried to sleep with my boyfriend Jake in college? Sophomore year, while I was sick with the flu. She told everyone we were practically broken up anyway. Emma's face went sheet white from her table near the dance floor. She'd clearly hoped that particular secret would stay buried forever. Or how about senior year, when she accidentally told my crush Brad Morrison that I'd been stalking him? I continued, memories flooding back with crystal clarity now. Funny how these accidents always seem to benefit Jessica somehow. This is insane, Jessica finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak. You're having some kind of breakdown, Sarah. Everyone can see that. I laughed, and the sound echoed strangely through the sound system. Am I? Because I feel remarkably clear-headed right now. For the first time in years, actually. Mark chose that moment to stand up, smoothing down his tie with that insufferable confidence he'd always worn like armor. Ladies, maybe we should take this somewhere private. Sit down, Mark, I snapped, whirling to face him. You don't get to play peacemaker here. You took $500 to come to my wedding specifically to hurt me. On what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The amount sent another wave of whispers through the crowd. $500 was serious money, enough to prove this wasn't some spontaneous decision or innocent +1 situation. How long have you two been planning this? I asked, looking between Jessica and Mark. Because I'm starting to think this goes back further than just tonight. Jessica, you've been encouraging me to stay late at work, telling me I should focus more on my career than my relationship with David. Were you hoping my marriage would fail before it even started? Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish, no words coming out. But her expression, guilt mixed with a kind of wild panic, told me everything I needed to know. Jesus Christ, David breathed beside me. Sarah, is this all true? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a notification. Then another. And another. I glanced down to see Instagram alerts lighting up my screen. Someone was already posting about the drama unfolding at the Morrison wedding. #wedding drama was probably trending by now. The really beautiful part, I said, turning back to address the crowd, is that Jessica actually thought she was punishing me tonight. She thought bringing Mark here would ruin my perfect day. But you know what? She gave me the greatest gift possible. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. She showed me exactly who she really is. The crowd was dead silent now, phones glowing like fireflies throughout the reception hall as guests documented every word. I could see my grandmother clutching her pearls in the front row, while David's college friends looked like they were watching the most dramatic reality show of their lives. But it was the expression on my mother's face that almost made me pause, a mixture of horror and something that looked almost like pride. She'd never liked Jessica, I realized now. All those subtle comments over the years about how Jessica seemed a little competitive or how she always managed to make things about herself. You know what the saddest part is? I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. I actually defended you, Jessica. When Emma tried to tell me about the Jake incident, I shut her down. When my mom said she didn't trust you, I accused her of being jealous of our friendship. When David mentioned that you seemed to undermine me sometimes, I told him he was imagining things. Jessica finally seemed to find her voice. Sarah, I know you're upset, but... Upset? I laughed, the sound sharp and bright. Oh honey, I'm not upset anymore. I'm liberated. Do you have any idea how exhausting it's been, having a friend who's been sabotaging me for 7 years? I never sabotaged you, Jessica said desperately, looking around the room as if searching for allies. I've always supported you, always been there. Were you being supportive when you told Mark that David and I have been having financial problems? I interrupted. Because we haven't. Not even a little bit. David's student loans were fully disclosed before we got engaged, and we have a joint savings account with $40,000 in it. David's head snapped toward Mark's table. You told him what? The pieces were falling into place beautifully now. I could see understanding dawning on faces throughout the crowd. This wasn't just about tonight. This was about a pattern of behavior that stretched back years. Or how about when you told me last month that David's ex-girlfriend Rachel was asking about him at that networking event? I continued. Funny thing, I checked with Rachel's friend Megan. Rachel wasn't even at that event. She was in Portland visiting her sister. That one hit home. I watched several of our mutual friends exchange glances, probably remembering other times Jessica had stirred up drama with carefully placed innocent comments. Sarah, please, Jessica's voice was barely above a whisper now. Can we just talk about this privately? After the reception? Why? So you can gaslight me some more? Tell me I'm being paranoid or that I misunderstood something? I shook my head. No, I think we should handle this the same way you handled my wedding day, publicly and without warning. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced down to see a text from an unknown number. Asterisk, is this really Jessica Chen from Morrison and Associates? My wife works there. Can you send those screenshots? Asterisk. Word was spreading fast. In the age of social media, Jessica's secret wouldn't stay contained to this room for long. By morning, everyone in our professional circles would know about her affair with Richard Morrison. Here's what's going to happen, I said, addressing Jessica directly now. You're going to leave. Both of you. You're going to walk out of my reception right now, and you're never going to contact me again. Sarah, Mark started to speak, but I cut him off with a look that could have melted steel. I'm not finished, I said coldly. Jessica, you're also going to resign from Morrison and Associates first thing Monday morning. Because if you don't, Patricia Morrison is going to receive every single screenshot I took, along with a detailed timeline of your affair with her husband. The color drained completely from Jessica's face. You can't. Oh, I absolutely can. And I will. I smiled sweetly. Just as friends, of course. The aftermath of my ultimatum hung in the air like smoke. Jessica stood frozen, her face cycling through emotions, rage, panic, disbelief, and finally, something that looked almost like respect. Around us, 150 wedding guests sat in stunned silence, phones glowing as they captured every moment of what would undoubtedly become the most talked about wedding reception in Connecticut history. You want to know what's really funny? I said, my voice carrying easily through the sound system. I actually brought printed copies of everything. I reached into the small clutch I'd tucked behind the microphone stand, the same clutch that was supposed to hold my lipstick for touch-ups and mints for the cake cutting. Instead, I pulled out a manila envelope. Sarah, don't, Jessica's voice cracked. Please. 17 screenshots, I continued, waving the envelope. 7 months of explicit messages. Hotel receipts that Richard charged to the company credit card. I'm sure the IRS would find those fascinating. And my personal favorite, the message where Richard promises to leave Patricia for you once his youngest daughter graduates high school. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Even Mark looked uncomfortable now, shifting in his seat as he realized he'd attached himself to a much bigger scandal than he'd bargained for. 3 more years, Jessica. He was asking you to be his secret for 3 more years while he stayed married to his wife. I shook my head in mock sympathy. And you called me pathetic for crying over him after he cheated. David moved closer to me, his hand finding my lower back. Sarah, maybe we should. No. My voice was steel. They came to my wedding to humiliate me. They planned this, David. She paid him $500 to show up here and watch me suffer on what should have been the happiest day of my life. I turned back to address the room, many of whom were frantically typing on their phones. Here's something else interesting I learned tonight. Jessica didn't just randomly reconnect with Mark. She's been talking to him for months. And Emma, I looked directly at my college roommate, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. You were right about Jake. You were right about all of it. Emma nodded miserably, tears starting to form in her eyes. I should have insisted you listen. The thing is, I continued, feeling a strange calm settling over me, I keep thinking about our friendship timeline. Every major relationship I've had, every important moment, Jessica was always right there with just the right comment to make me doubt myself. I started counting on my fingers. Jake transfers schools suddenly after Jessica tries to seduce him. Brad Morrison thinks I'm a stalker after Jessica accidentally shares my feelings. My promotion gets overshadowed by Jessica's constant complaints about her own career struggles, which, as it turns out, were being solved by sleeping with her married boss. Stop it, Jessica finally exploded, her voice shaking with fury. You think you're so perfect, don't you? Standing up there in your expensive dress, in this expensive venue, with your perfect husband and your perfect life. You have no idea what it's like to work for everything while you just coast on being likable. The mask was finally slipping completely. This was the real Jessica, resentful, vindictive, and absolutely convinced she was the victim in this scenario. Coast? I laughed incredulously. Jessica, I worked 60-hour weeks to get that promotion. I earned my degree magna cum laude while you were busy trying to steal other people's boyfriends. I built my relationship with David over 3 years of honest communication and mutual respect. While I had to screw my boss to get anywhere, she shot back, then immediately looked horrified that she'd said it out loud. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Even Mark was staring at her now, probably realizing he'd allied himself with someone more desperate and destructive than he'd imagined. There it is, I said softly into the microphone. Finally. The truth. The confession seemed to break something in Jessica. She swayed on her feet, gripping the edge of the table for support, while the reality of what she'd just admitted in front of 150 people sank in. But instead of crumbling, something harder crystallized in her expression. You know what, Sarah? Fine. You want the whole truth? Jessica's voice grew stronger, more defiant. Yes, I brought Mark here to mess with your perfect day. Yes, I've been sleeping with Richard for 7 months. And yes, maybe I have been competing with you since college. She straightened up, smoothing down her dusty rose bridesmaid dress like armor. But you want to know why? Because everything has always come so easily to you. Perfect grades, perfect boyfriend, perfect job, perfect wedding. Do you know how exhausting it is being your best friend? Always coming in second place to Sarah fucking Martinez? The crowd was riveted now, phones held high to capture every word. I could see my cousin recording from 3 different angles, probably already uploading to TikTok. I worked twice as hard as you in college and you still graduated magna cum laude while I scraped by with a 3.2, Jessica continued, her voice growing more bitter with each word. I applied to 15 marketing firms after graduation and got rejected by all of them while Hartwell and Associates practically begged you to take their offer. Because I had internships and recommendations, I started, but she cut me off. Because professors loved you. Because you knew how to play the game without even trying. Jessica's composure was completely gone now, mascara starting to smudge under her eyes. So yes, I slept with Richard. Because that was the only way someone like me could compete with someone like you. The raw honesty was almost more shocking than the original confession. I could see faces in the crowd shifting from entertained to uncomfortable as they witnessed what felt like 7 years of resentment exploding in real time. And Jake? I asked quietly, my voice barely audible through the sound system. Jake was going to break up with you anyway, Jessica said with vicious satisfaction. He told me at that party that you were too needy, too clingy. I just offered him an alternative before he had to have an awkward conversation. Emma made a small sound of protest from her table, but Jessica was on a roll now. Every guy you've ever dated has complained to me about something, Sarah. Your anxiety, your perfectionism, the way you analyze everything to death. I was doing them a favor by giving them an excuse to leave. The words hit like physical blows, but underneath the hurt, I felt something else, clarity. This wasn't about tonight, or even about Mark. This was about 7 years of systematic sabotage from someone who was supposed to be my closest friend. How long have you been planning this? I asked. Not just tonight. All of it. Jessica smiled, and for the first time all evening, it looked genuine. Genuinely cruel, but genuine. The Mark thing? That started 3 months ago when I saw his dating profile on Bumble. I've been feeding him information about your relationship with David ever since. Your fight about the wedding budget, your stress about his family not liking you at first, that week in April when you thought he was being distant because of work. My blood ran cold. Those were private conversations, vulnerable moments I'd shared with my supposed best friend during late-night phone calls and girls' nights. I told him you still had feelings for him, Jessica continued conversationally. That you seemed unsure about David. That maybe if he showed up tonight looking good in a suit, you might realize you were settling. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair, apparently not enjoying being exposed as a pawn in Jessica's larger game. The 500 was just insurance, she added with a shrug. To make sure he'd actually go through with it. But here's my favorite part, Jessica continued, and I could hear the venom dripping from every word. I've been documenting everything, Sarah. Every insecurity you've shared, every doubt about David, every moment of weakness. I have 7 years' worth of your secrets recorded in my phone. She pulled out her device, waving it like a weapon. Voice memos from when you called me crying at 2 a.m. Screenshots of your texts about being afraid David's too good for you. Photos of you having panic attacks about the wedding planning. My stomach dropped. I remembered those calls, those vulnerable moments when Jessica had seemed like the only person who understood my anxiety. She'd always been so patient, so willing to listen to me spiral about my fears and insecurities. You recorded me? My voice came out as barely a whisper. Insurance policy, Jessica said with a satisfied smirk. Because I knew someday you'd try to throw me away like you do everyone else who doesn't fit into your perfect little life anymore. Remember your roommate freshman year? What about your lab partner junior year who had a crush on you? You discard people the second they become inconvenient. The accusations were so twisted, so far from reality, that I almost couldn't process them. But then I saw David's face, confusion mixed with growing alarm as he tried to reconcile the woman he married with the neurotic mess Jessica was describing. David, Jessica turned to address my husband directly. Did you know your wife called me 17 times the night before your engagement? Crying about how she wasn't ready, how she was afraid she was making a mistake. I started to protest, but she cut me off. I have the call log. I have the recordings. 5 hours of Sarah sobbing about how she loved you but wasn't sure she was marriage material. Jessica's smile was poisonous. Should I play them? I'm sure your guests would find it fascinating. The room had gone completely silent except for the soft click of phone cameras. I could feel 150 pairs of eyes burning into me, waiting to see how I'd respond to this nuclear revelation. But as I looked at Jessica, really looked at her, I realized something had shifted. The desperate, panicked woman from 5 minutes ago had been replaced by someone calculating and cruel. Someone who had been planning this character assassination for months, maybe years. You know what, Jessica? I said, my voice growing steadier with each word. Go ahead. Play them. Her confident expression faltered slightly. What? Play the recordings. Show everyone the screenshots. Share every vulnerable moment I trusted you with over the past 7 years. I turned to face the crowd, then back to her. Because you know what you'll prove? That I'm human. That I had normal pre-wedding anxiety that I worked through with therapy and honest communication with my partner. David stepped closer to the microphone, his voice joining mine. Sarah told me about those doubts herself, weeks before the wedding. We talked through them together. It's called emotional maturity. The color drained from Jessica's face as she realized her nuclear weapon had just turned into a dud. But what you've proven tonight, I continued, is that you're the kind of person who records your best friend's panic attacks and saves them to use as blackmail. What kind of person does that, Jessica? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time all evening, Jessica Chen, master manipulator and 7-year saboteur of my life, had absolutely nothing to say. The silence stretched on for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. Jessica stood there, her phone still clutched in her hand like a useless weapon, while the reality of her situation seemed to finally sink in. But then something shifted in her expression, a kind of reckless desperation that made my skin crawl. You want to play this game, Sarah, she said, her voice taking on a manic edge. Fine. Let's really play. She started typing furiously on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I'm posting everything right now. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, every recording, every screenshot, every pathetic moment you've shared with me. Let's see how perfect your life looks when everyone knows the real Sarah Martinez. My heart stuttered, but David's hand found mine, squeezing tight. Do it, he said loudly enough for the microphone to pick up. Post everything. Sarah and I have nothing to hide from each other. David, Jessica's laugh was sharp and brittle. You have no idea what you're defending. Did you know Sarah stalked her ex-boyfriend Tom for 3 months after he broke up with her senior year? Driving past his apartment, checking his social media obsessively. That's not, I started, but she was on a roll now, her voice getting higher and more frantic. Or how about the fact that she's been lying about her family's financial situation your entire relationship? Her parents aren't successful small business owners, David. They're in debt up to their eyeballs. That catering company has been failing for 2 years. The lie was so outrageous, so completely fabricated, that I actually laughed. Jessica, my parents paid for half this wedding in cash. There are literally 150 witnesses to how successful their business is. But I could see her strategy now, throw out enough accusations, true or false, that something would stick. Create enough chaos that people would remember the drama instead of focusing on her betrayal. What about the abortion junior year? Jessica's voice cracked like a whip across the silent room. The one you never told David about? Spring break in Cancun, remember? You made me drive you to the clinic and hold your hand. Enough. David's voice boomed through the microphone as he stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. That's enough. Sarah told me about that before we got engaged. We've discussed everything, her past, her family, all of it. You're not exposing secrets, Jessica. You're just proving you're exactly as toxic as she said you are. Wait. When had I called Jessica toxic to David? I thought back to our conversations about my friendships, and realized he was right. I had been complaining about Jessica more and more over the past year, questioning her motives, feeling drained after spending time with her. The abortion thing isn't even true, I said into the microphone, my voice deadly calm. I've never been pregnant. But the fact that you'd lie about something that serious, something that painful for so many people, just proves how desperate you are right now. Jessica's face went white, then red, then white again. She'd overplayed her hand with that fabrication, and everyone in the room could see it. You want to know what I think, Jessica? I continued, feeling a strange peace settling over me. I think you've been so jealous of my life for so long that you've started believing your own lies. You've convinced yourself that I don't deserve what I have, that everything good in my life is some kind of accident or fraud. Mark chose that moment to stand up abruptly, throwing his napkin on the table. I'm out. This is insane, even for $500. Sit down, Mark, Jessica hissed, but he was already walking toward the exit. No way. You said this would be a harmless prank, maybe make your friend squirm a little. You didn't tell me you were planning to destroy her entire life with lies. He paused at the edge of the dance floor, addressing the room. For what it's worth, Sarah, most of what she told me about you was probably bullshit too. And with that, my cheating ex-fiancé walked out of my wedding reception, leaving Jessica completely alone in her web of lies and manipulation. The silence after Mark's exit was deafening. Jessica stood alone at her table, her phone still clutched in her trembling hands, mascara streaking down her cheeks in dark rivulets. But instead of the defeated collapse I expected, something dangerous flickered in her eyes, the cornered animal look of someone with nothing left to lose. You know what, Sarah, she said, her voice taking on an eerie calm that made my skin crawl. You're right. I have been jealous of you for 7 years. But there's one more thing you don't know. My stomach clenched. After everything that had already been revealed, what else could she possibly have left? David, Jessica turned to face my husband directly, her smile sharp as broken glass. Asked your wife about her little lunch meetings with Thomas Chin. The name hit me like a physical blow. Thomas Chin, Jessica's older brother, the successful lawyer who'd just gone through a messy divorce 6 months ago. The same Thomas who'd been texting me increasingly personal messages over the past 2 months, asking for advice about dating again, wanting to grab coffee to talk about Jessica's behavior. I started, but Jessica was already pulling up something on her phone. 3 lunches in the past 6 weeks, she continued, her voice sing-song with false sweetness. The Meridian Hotel restaurant, Romano's downtown, and my personal favorite, that little French place on Elm Street where you and David had your first date. David's face went pale. Sarah, what is she talking about? My mouth felt like cotton. The lunches with Thomas had been completely innocent, he'd been genuinely concerned about Jessica's erratic behavior lately, and I'd been trying to understand if there was some family history I should know about. But I could see how it looked, especially with Jessica's twisted presentation. Thomas has been worried about Jessica, I said quickly. He asked me to meet him to discuss. Discuss what exactly? Jessica's laugh was sharp and manic. Because according to the screenshots he sent me, you've been playing marriage counselor to my recently divorced brother. Very hands-on counseling, from what I can see. She held up her phone, and even from the microphone I could see text messages displayed on the screen. My blood ran cold as I realized Thomas had been forwarding our conversations to his sister. I understand how hard this must be for you, Jessica read aloud in a mock sympathetic voice. Sometimes marriages end for reasons we can't control. Very comforting, Sarah. Especially from a woman who just got married herself. Those messages were about his divorce, I said desperately, looking between David and the crowd of increasingly uncomfortable guests. He was struggling with the custody arrangement and you told him he deserved better than his ex-wife, Jessica interrupted. Someone who would appreciate his intelligence and kindness. Your words, not mine. David stepped back from me slightly, and that small movement felt like a chasm opening between us. Sarah, you've been meeting with Thomas Chin behind my back? It wasn't behind your back, I protested, though even as I said it, I realized I'd never mentioned the meetings to David. He reached out because he was concerned about Jessica's behavior. I thought I was helping. Helping him get over his divorce by taking him to our anniversary restaurant? David's voice was quiet, but I could hear the hurt underneath. The French bistro. God, why had I suggested that place? It had seemed convenient at the time, but now it looked deliberate, romantic even. And the Meridian Hotel? Jessica pressed her advantage, sensing blood in the water. That's where you told him marriage was about finding someone who truly understands you. Pretty philosophical conversation for lunch between friends. The crowd was eating this up. After 30 minutes of watching me systematically destroy my former best friend, the tables were turning in the most dramatic way possible. I could see phones recording every word, probably streaming live to social media by now. Show them the photo, Thomas, Jessica called out suddenly. I spun around, and my heart stopped. Thomas Chen was standing near the back entrance, his tall frame unmistakable even in the dim lighting. When had he arrived? How long had he been watching this disaster unfold? He walked forward slowly, his expression unreadable, holding his phone like a smoking gun. I'm sorry, Sarah, he said quietly as he approached the microphone area. She made me promise to come tonight. She said it was the only way to prove her point. David's face was a mask of confusion and growing betrayal. Prove what point? Thomas looked miserable, but he held up his phone anyway. On the screen was a photo from our lunch last Tuesday, me reaching across the table to touch his hand while he looked upset about something. Completely innocent in context, but devastating in implication. She was comforting me about losing custody of Emma, Thomas said quietly. But Jessica said, she said if I didn't show up tonight with evidence, she'd tell my ex-wife I was dating someone new and ruin my chances at the appeal. So you're all here, I whispered, the full scope of Jessica's plan finally becoming clear. This whole thing. You've been planning this for months. Jessica's smile was triumphant now, all traces of her earlier panic gone. I told you, Sarah. 7 years of watching you win at everything while I got the scraps. Tonight was supposed to be my turn. The full scope of Jessica's manipulation hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about bringing Mark to my wedding, this was a coordinated attack involving her own brother, months of planning, and a level of vindictive calculation that took my breath away. Thomas, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief, you've been reporting back to her this entire time? Every conversation we had about your custody battle, about your concerns for your sister, you were feeding it all back to Jessica? Thomas looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. She said you were trying to break up our family. That you'd been poisoning people against her for years, and now you were using me to do it. And you believed her? David's voice was ice cold as he stared at both Chen siblings. She's my sister, Thomas said weakly. And she had screenshots of Sarah's messages that seemed. I don't know, they seemed flirty when she showed them to me out of context. Jessica stepped forward, her confidence restored now that she had backup. Show him the one about emotional connection, Thomas. The one where Sarah said she felt like you really understood her in a way that was rare to find. My face burned with humiliation. That message had been about understanding the pain of watching someone you care about make destructive choices. I'd been talking about my frustration with Jessica's behavior, and Thomas had shared similar concerns about his sister's recent erratic patterns. I was talking about understanding family dysfunction, I said desperately. About how hard it is to love someone who keeps hurting themselves and everyone around them. Were you? Jessica's voice was syrup sweet. Because Thomas interpreted it very differently. Didn't you, big brother? Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Look, I may have misunderstood some of the messages. Jessica showed them to me right after you touched my hand at lunch, and with the divorce and everything, I wasn't thinking clearly. You thought I was hitting on you? The words came out louder than I intended, echoing through the reception hall. Thomas, I'm married. I was literally planning my wedding during those conversations. People have affairs, Jessica said with a casual shrug. Married people have emotional affairs all the time. Just ask Richard Morrison's wife. The comparison hit like a slap. She was trying to paint my innocent attempts to help Thomas through his custody issues as the same kind of betrayal she'd been engaging in with her boss. This is unbelievable, David said, running his hands through his hair. Sarah, why didn't you tell me about any of these meetings? If they were so innocent, why keep them secret? And there it was, the question I'd been dreading. Because the truth was, I had kept them secret, not out of any romantic intent, but because I'd been embarrassed about still trying to fix Jessica's family problems even as our friendship deteriorated. Because I knew how it would look, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Thomas was going through a horrible divorce, Jessica was acting increasingly unstable, and I thought if I could help him understand her behavior, maybe I could salvage our friendship. By meeting him at romantic restaurants? Jessica pressed. By telling him he deserved better than his ex-wife? By holding his hand in public? She was crying, Thomas interjected suddenly, looking directly at Jessica. In that photo you're so proud of, Sarah was crying because she was frustrated about your behavior. She spent 20 minutes telling me how worried she was about you, how she didn't know how to help someone who seemed determined to self-destruct. Jessica's triumphant expression faltered slightly. That's not. And the restaurant suggestions? Thomas continued, his voice growing stronger. Sarah asked me to pick the locations. She said she didn't want to accidentally choose somewhere that would make me think about my ex-wife. I picked the French place because Claire hated French food. The revelation sent a murmur through the crowd. I could see the narrative shifting again as Thomas, Jessica's own brother and supposed co-conspirator, began dismantling her carefully constructed case. Jessica, what the hell is wrong with you? Thomas said, his voice filled with disgust. Sarah was trying to help both of us, and you twisted it into some kind of affair conspiracy? For what? To ruin her wedding? But Jessica wasn't finished. Her eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction as she pulled up something else on her phone. Tell them about the kiss, Thomas. The word kiss hung in the air like a death sentence. I watched David's face crumble, saw my mother's hand fly to her mouth in the front row, felt the collective intake of breath from 150 wedding guests who thought they'd already witnessed the scandal of the year. But Thomas Chen looked at his sister like she'd just revealed herself to be a complete stranger. What kiss? He said, his voice deadly quiet. Jessica, what the hell are you talking about? Jessica's smile was pure venom. Don't play dumb, Thomas. Last Tuesday, outside Romano's. Sarah walked you to your car, you were both emotional about our conversation, and I hugged her goodbye, Thomas interrupted, his voice growing louder. Jesus Christ, Jessica, it was a hug. A 30-second hug because I was grateful she was trying to help our family. That's not what it looked like in the photo, Jessica said, but her confidence was wavering now. What photo? Thomas demanded. Show everyone this photo, Jessica. Right now. She fumbled with her phone, swiping frantically, her face growing paler by the second. It was on here, I swear There is no photo, Thomas said with dawning horror. Because there was no kiss. You just made that up. In front of 150 people, at Sarah's wedding, you just fabricated evidence that doesn't exist. The silence was absolutely deafening. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, frozen with wine glasses and dessert plates as they witnessed the complete implosion of Jessica's credibility. She's been lying, I said into the microphone, my voice steady for the first time in 20 minutes. About the kiss, about the messages being flirty, probably about half the things she said tonight. This is what 7 years of jealousy looks like, everyone. This is what happens when someone decides your happiness is their personal enemy. David stepped closer to me, his expression shifting from hurt confusion to protective fury. Jessica, you orchestrated this entire nightmare based on lies? Not lies, Jessica said desperately. Interpretations. Context. Sarah has been trying to help my family while you've been systematically destroying hers. Thomas cut her off. Do you have any idea what you've done? I could lose my custody appeal because of tonight. My ex-wife's lawyer is probably already downloading videos of this disaster. He turned to face the crowd, his voice carrying clearly through the room. I want everyone here to know that Sarah Martinez has never been anything but appropriate and helpful. She met with me because she was worried about my sister's mental health, and I'm starting to understand why. Thomas, Jessica's voice cracked. You're my brother. You're supposed to be on my side. I was on your side, he said sadly. I've been on your side through every self-destructive decision you've made since college. But this? Trying to destroy an innocent woman's marriage on her wedding day? I can't defend this, Jess. I won't. And with that, Jessica Chan's final ally abandoned her cause. I looked out at the crowd, my family, David's family, friends who'd traveled across the country to celebrate with us, and realized something beautiful. Not one person looked at me with suspicion anymore. They were looking at Jessica with a mixture of pity and disgust, but when their eyes met mine, I saw understanding. Ladies and gentlemen, I said into the microphone, my voice clear and strong. I think we've all learned something valuable tonight about the importance of surrounding ourselves with people who genuinely want us to succeed. So let's end this exactly the way it should end. I looked directly at Jessica. Get out. Both of you. And don't ever contact me, my husband, or anyone in our families again. Jessica opened her mouth one final time, but no words came. She grabbed her purse, shot one last venomous look around the room, and walked toward the exit with as much dignity as she could muster. The sound of the door slamming behind her was the most beautiful thing I'd heard all night.